You're listening to Stimulus Tech Talk, a conversation-based podcast created by Stimulus Technologies that covers a range of topics related to business and technology.
Welcome to Stimulus Tech Talk. I'm Sherry Lipp, Marketing Manager here at Stimulus Technologies, and I am here with Stimulus Technologies CEO Nathan Whittacre. And today we're going to be talking about IT ownership. Welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everybody to the Stimulus Tech Talk podcast.
So this is kind of an interesting topic because my people probably have different ways of thinking about it, but what are we talking about when we talk about owning the IT in a business?
Isn't it about whoever owns the computers, right?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think it could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. Business owner perspective, let's put ourselves in the owner's shoes or the management's shoes. Yeah, the business itself owns the IT infrastructure, the computers and the network. They bought the equipment. But the question is who takes responsibility for it? And I think a lot of small business owners want somebody else to quote unquote own the IT or take care of the IT or be responsible for the information technology and the infrastructure. And that I think is problematic because you, as a business owner, do you have somebody else own your bank account or own your financials or own your production of your product or own your customer experience? And in the end, it is the business owner and the leadership team that takes full responsibility for it. I'll give you a quick example why I say that. In most compliance frameworks, there has to be a party, an individual that is the responsible party for the compliance and cybersecurity protections of the business. And it can't be a third party. It has to be somebody inside the organization that has authority over the organization. So usually a company officer or a designated individual in the business. So when we're talking about owning the IT or the responsibility for the technology inside the business, it really needs to be somebody in leadership in the company. It could be the owner or a designee of the owner, but it is somebody inside the business themselves that is accountable and is responsible for the risks. And it shouldn't be your receptionist or the guy that you recently hired that knows a little bit about technology, that is good on computers and can take care of it. It has to be somebody that has responsibility to make decisions for the company. So that's what I look at from an owning or responsibility perspective of the technology inside the company.
So what do you see when businesses don't have an IT department or an outsourced vendor like us? How do you see IT
Yeah,
being handled?
yeah. So I mean, you shared that example briefly. A lot of business owners, they'll hire somebody to do a task. It might be the marketing person, it could be the office manager, the practice manager, maybe at a medical office, that's good with technology. They're like, "Oh man, you're good at spreadsheets, and I see you're using AI really well. Why don't you take over the IT for the business?" And so suddenly, this lower level person that was recently hired on is responsible for all the IT infrastructure. The problem is they're not an IT professional. They're good at the job that they were hired for, marketing or maybe sales or, operations, but they didn't go to formal training or schooling or education or experience with information technology or cybersecurity, and now they're responsible for it. So they're going to do what they think is right, but that doesn't mean that it is the right thing to do. And so that's where a lot of mistakes can happen. And certainly they don't know the entire um, flow and everything that needs to occur to keep a company safe and protected. So, certainly don't want to put somebody responsible for your payroll inside your company or human resources or sales that doesn't have experience in that. So why would you put your IT infrastructure, one of the like the lifeblood of a business today, in the hands of somebody that isn't formally trained and knows with experience of what the right things are to do?
So when businesses do that, maybe they think it's working fine. What red flags do you see when you go in and check things out when you do the assessment?
Yeah, it works for a while because they're fixing things as they break, but we see nothing being done proactively on the network. So we don't see updates occurring, uh, on a regular schedule. We don't see, firmware being updated on routers and network devices. We don't see monitoring systems in place that are being reported back, or maybe there is on a few computers. So that's often what we see that happens is a few computers are working well, and there's a lot that aren't. And so we see a big discrepancy inside the organization between the computers that are being taken care of and the systems that are not. And again, we don't see centralized reporting or centralized management. And so if a computer that maybe is at some a laptop that a sales executive is taking around that never comes into the office, that's never being updated or managed, because the person that's quote unquote responsible never sees it. And so there's no centralized management. Now you can have internal IT, a dedicated team that is managing all of that, and it's working well. But most small businesses don't have the budget to hire a team inside their companies, and so it's for businesses that are just trying to take care of it themselves, whether it's a business owner themselves. I mean, we see a lot of times for really small businesses, it's the business owner, or maybe a son of the business owner, or cousin, or some family member that's trying to do it for them as a an after hours or after work side project. We just don't see centralized or proactive management of the network.
So when somebody does get a service provider like us or another IT service provider, how does that ownership look? They just handing it off to us, or there's somebody should still take ownership of it?
Yeah, there still should be somebody in leadership taking responsibility for it. I'll go back to the example of payroll again. You can hire an outside payroll company that actually cuts the checks, pays the employees, files the taxes, does everything that they need to make sure the company is, from a tactical level, is working well. But the strategic and the operation side, and also the reporting of what's happening in the business, still needs to come from the business themselves. So somebody inside the company that knows the employees, knows what's going on, is going to be making decisions on hiring and firing and pay scales for the employees, things like that. And that's a responsibility of the business owner or somebody in the leadership team, an officer of the company that's responsible for it. Same thing with IT. Us as an outside managed IT service provider and managed security service provider is taking care of the tactical needs of the business, making sure that everything that needs to be done to keep the systems current, up to date, working well, are being taken care of. And then we interface with whoever on the leadership team of the company is responsible for the information technology to ensure that the strategy of the company is matching up with what we're doing from a tactical standpoint. And so one of the things we do is periodic technology business reviews, or quarterly business reviews, or annual business reviews that match the strategy of the company from a technology perspective to what we do day to day. And so those can happen as often as weekly, or as long apart as annually, but they should happen periodically. We like quarterly the best for businesses that are operating well, but we start often with a new client that comes on board. We'll meet with them almost weekly to mark those red flags. What do we need to do? We'll give suggestions to the company of things that we see that are standard and working well for other businesses in the same industry. And then it's up to the business to decide what is, from a strategic standpoint, where they want to go, and we'll help them take them there with technology. But it's a cooperative interaction from the leadership of the company to the uh, IT service provider.
Do you still see sometimes when people have an IT service provider, like people like to put off meetings sometimes, and do you see them still being reactive rather than proactive, even when they've outsourced some IT?
Yeah, when we come in and work with companies, review their systems, we often see that even the IT service provider is being mostly reactive. There's still a lot of IT providers out there, especially smaller shops that are in a break fix model. They may still call themselves a managed service provider, but they're more, responding only when things are broken. So the one of the employees of the client has a problem, they'll call them up and say, I can't get into my Outlook or my computer's not turning on. Can you help me out with that? And then when something breaks, we take care of it. Uh, you know, but they still, those IT service providers, they're still calling themselves managed service providers, which they're not. They're not, managing the system and being proactive. Use that term a lot, but that's really what we call it: is making sure that things are working well before they break. So, an example, we're bringing on a new client right now that's had a managed service provider for years, and that's their biggest complaint, and that's why we're, getting on with that client is they only respond when there's issues, and sometimes the response time is, days or weeks before things are fixed, and they're looking for a much more proactive, advanced monitoring and making sure things don't break so we don't have to fix things now. We have to react to things periodically as they break. Hardware fails. There's still, difficulties that people have, and there's projects that need to occur. But the more that we can be proactive about the work, the better things feel inside the organization. And how do you know if your IT provider is being proactive? When you ask the question, what is my IT provider really doing? I don't feel like they're really doing much. Then you have to ask yourself, well, are are there systems that are going down, or is there anything wrong? Or are you getting hacked or anything like that? It's like, no, nothing, none of that is happening. It's because the IT service provider is doing their work in the background to prevent any of that from happening. There's so much work that goes on to prevent things that then you ask yourself, well, things are going really well. I'm not quite sure what everything's going on. And that's where, that collaboration, the IT service provider should be bringing reports in of all the proactive work that they're doing, all the background work, all the automation that's being done in the background to make sure that everything's working well. And that's when, IT is working well, is when you really don't have to call them a lot, except when there's projects or changes. And then the problem is that the businesses go, wow, should I really be paying for this? Why am I paying for IT when we really never have to call them? And that's when things are well, is you're paying them for not having to call them for problems. You shouldn't have to call for problems very often. Only when you need new stuff or changes. Hire an employee or expanding your offices or things like that. So that's when the IT service provider is doing really well, is when you don't have to call them all the time. So don't fire them because they're doing a great job. Yeah. So
What should people look for in if they're looking to get an outsourced IT service provider? So they know that they're going to be proactive ahead of time instead of like being in the middle of it and being like they're not fulfilling what we need.
well, they should be talking to you about some of the stuff that we're discussing. And, I think a good provider starts with great marketing. If they have their marketing and sales systems down really well, if they're getting back to you quickly on that side of it, if they're very clear on the work that they're doing, detail all that out. Their service delivery should be far better than, hey, come over and take a look at my systems, and then they don't give good concept of what's going on. They should give you a good prescription after running a lot of tests on your system to ensure that things are going, you know get an idea what things are going on inside the organization. So look at the marketing, look at what they're proposing, and making sure that it appears comprehensive. I mean, going back to the medical example, you wouldn't want to, if you think you're coughing up blood or something like that, and you go into the doctor's office and tell him your symptoms, and then he goes, "Oh, okay, just take this pill and walk out." That wouldn't be a very good prescription. The doctor should run some tests, at least look at your what's going on, and probably some comprehensive tests about what's going on before they actually do something about it, to ensure that they know what they're doing. So same thing with technology. If you're having a problem and you're wanting to make a change, and you're questioning what's going on, your IT provider that you're talking to should, run a lot of tests and really understand what's going on in the environment before making a prescription for the results that they want to do.
Well, let's destroy a myth people probably have, because I was just thinking about a conversation with an HVAC provider we had, and they're like, "We'd like to help people ahead of time before they're calling us with a complete shutdown." That how we feel, because I think a lot of people are like, "Well, when don't they want the disaster because they'll make more money?"
That is a good question. Yeah, that is kind of a funny example. No, the answer is no. The last thing our team wants is to constantly react to fires. There's certainly that's the worst case situation for us is if we're having to go deal with fires all the time. We want to do that proactive work. We want to, create recurring tickets inside our systems to check to make sure things are going correctly. And then if a fire does happen, we want the automation to put it out itself, or to be prepared for it so that we don't have to, reinvent the wheel every time a fire breaks out. I think like backups are a great example. We want backups to be working really well. So in the event that there's a hardware failure or something critical that happens inside the organization, that within a few minutes or maybe an hour, we can have the whole organization back up and running because we've checking those backups, making sure that they're working, and we could roll back to um, you know a, a point in time quickly that won't cause data loss, and it can happen quickly that there's very loss of business operations. Now if that fire happens and now we have to sell them a new server and have to recover, spend hours and hours recovering from that disaster. Yeah, sure, we could charge more for it, but we don't like it, the customer doesn't like it, and the results are never good in the end. So the best case scenario is we've been proactive, making sure that systems are working properly so that if that disaster happens that we can respond, and everybody ends up happy at the end, and it's less work on us and less downtime for the client. And even if that disaster happened, everybody's like, well, that wasn't too bad. I'm glad everything worked well.
So if somebody is in a situation where they don't really know the state of their IT, maybe it hasn't really been owned, and they maybe they are on the verge of a total server meltdown. What steps should they take to figure out where they're at?
I think again, got to get some diagnostics done. So there's plenty of organizations that can come in and review the systems, whether it's stimulus technology or some other professional MSP can come in there and run tests on the system and take a look at what's going on. Um, I I really do believe that it has to be a professional that has the right tools, right relationships, with good vendors that can run these tests. It shouldn't be just a guy that works in IT or knows a little bit about technology coming in and doing those diagnostics. What is it? The Google MD. You certainly don't want Google IT either. So I'm sure all of us have had the experience of like, oh, I have this pain in my elbow. Let me ask Google or ChatGPT to solve my elbow problem. And then you start doing like these exercises, or maybe, put some cream on it, or, maybe take a supplement or something like that. And then the pain doesn't go away. And it's like, Google told me it would. And then you go into the doctor, it's like, oh no, that's you're having some, muscle tension in your neck. And it's like, well, my pain's here. Why is it in my neck? And an expert will know the difference between the two. And so we definitely want to look at experts to help us diagnose the problems, and not just take the prescription of somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, or just some web searches or AI searches to diagnose a problem.
So just to wrap it up, what does ownership of IT look like when somebody has the everything in place with the managed service provider and they're doing their business reviews, and what are they preparing for when they're doing a technology business review?
Well, the first thing it looks like, to answer your first question, is it looks like peace of mind. It feels good. The leadership, the owner of the business, the CEO, or whoever is assigned, director of the company. can sleep well at night knowing things are getting taken care of. So that's the first thing is develops peace of mind inside the organization. Employees are happy, staff is happy, customers are happy, everybody's working well with their IT. So that's what it feels like. And what does it look like from a working standpoint? There's at least once a year, there's a discussion in those technology business reviews about the strategic direction of the business, any changes they're making, new product lines they're bringing on, maybe a discussion of moving into new offices, maybe contractions if that's going to happen in the year. But it should be an overall business discussion of what's going on inside the company. Then there should be a look at, vendors they're purchasing from, line of business applications, software packages that they're discussing. That should be part of the discussion. Also, talking about the hardware infrastructure, computers that are aging out, budgeting for replacements of systems, buying, servers or computers, laptops, whatever it may be. What needs to be replaced over the next year so the company can do an accurate budget of what they need to implement inside their organization. And then, it moves a little bit more into tactical, what needs to happen day to day inside the organization. We're hiring or, replacing this employee, over the next couple of months. Those are more tactical discussions. And the IT provider should be coming to you periodically and saying, we see this new threat, we see this new opportunity. These are the changes we're making in our work, and this is how it's going to improve your organization. And so those discussions should be coming from the IT vendor of what they're doing to improve the operations of their company, their client that they're working with too. So very collaborative. But in the end, people should walk away with a clear idea of how much needs to be spent over the next year on technology, what changes need to happen, maybe some things to take away from research, new line of business applications or technologies that can help the business quite a bit to improve automation or AI implementations, things like that. That meeting and that work should be there should be takeaways, and that should be productive for both sides of the conversation. So, but in the end, it's all about peace of mind and better operations for the business. And we're all in business to make more profit and to take care of our employees, take care of our clients. And the result of good IT ownership and collaboration should be that. That's the end goal, is to drive more to the business's bottom line and make, everything work well for the staff and for their clients and improve customer experience for the business that they're working on.
All right. Well, thanks, Nathan. Good advice as always. And I hope if you're listening that you learned something about your IT.
Take care, everybody.